feminism is a topic that's talked about and adopted by people across the political spectrum with a lot of different opinions about women's rights and who would consider themselves champions of women's and girls or of women's empowerment, but have very different ideas of what that actually looks like in practice and what that
Mm,
means.
mm,
And the exciting part of living in that time is that seeing, very public, commercial, and highly consumed properties identifying themselves with feminism is a step forward.
This is Dr. Andrew Rimby. Thanks for joining us here in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. If you don't know, you can get all of our episodes ad-free on Patreon, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. All of Mary's true crime episodes ad-free, video episodes ad-free from the ITBR interviews. Also, follow us on Instagram, please. Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I like to put a lot of exciting arts and culture clips from the podcast, TV shows, films that we've discussed. TikTok is Dr. Andrew Rimby. Long story, the Ivory Tower Boiler Room one got taken off by TikTok because it was too salacious and scandalous, in my opinion. But I might be just having an Oscar Wilde complex there, thinking, that I was causing such a sensation on TikTok. So please rate us on Apple. It really, really helps. Review us. If you're on Spotify, you can rate us there too. YouTube, please follow our YouTube channel. Please like the video, share it with your friends, your community. The only way that I can keep giving you all free, exciting podcast episodes is because of the reach of the podcast. So, rating us, reviewing us, it really, really does help. Also, shout out to Sean, our intern, who, if you see the cover art, you see the edits of the podcast, that's all Sean. So, amazing work by Sean. So, I hope you all enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Andrew Rimby with the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, back again with one of my favorites. I mean, last episode that she was on, I remember listening back to it and calling her the preeminent musical theater scholar, which I'm still going to stand by, Stacy, even though she had a certain look on her face. But it is very true in my book. And,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Stacy Wolf is just an incredible musical theater scholar, professor of theater, music theater, American studies at Princeton University. She's written everything from A Problem Like Maria, Changed for Good, Beyond Broadway, and I love having her back here. And we're
Thank you.
joined, you're welcome. Well, thank you, Stacy. And we're joined with one of her former students who I'm really excited to have here, Paige Allen, who is a writer, researcher, theater maker, and storyteller. She holds an MST in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies from the University of Oxford, and an AB in English from Princeton University, which I just learned from her has a little Latin root there. So it's like a BA. It is a BA, basically. So, Paige, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So I should, let the audience know both of you just co-wrote a book called Feminist Approaches in Musical Theater by Methuen Drama, who I actually had on Ryan Donovan, who did the queer approaches in musical theater. So
Right.
Great.
I love these, like what I call chapbook, approachable text to analyze, any genre, but here musical theater. So I was telling Stacy and Paige I was reading this on the way to see 1776 at Paper Mill Playhouse, and you got me really, into this frame of mind, thinking of, the female character's race. So, I mean, I think my first question is just how did this project come to be between you two?
Mm, yeah. Yeah. Well, Paige and I, Paige was my student a while ago. Probably pretty soon, I'm going to stop saying that Paige was my student. And I'll just say that she is my collaborator. A few years after she graduated, we wrote an article together for a collection that Mary Jo Lodge edited that was a new musical theater history decade by decade. And we wrote
Mm.
a chapter together about the 2010s, focusing on waitress and women creative teams. And we really enjoyed working together. I had asked Paige if she wanted to collaborate with me because I was excited to contribute to this book. And I thought it would be a stronger essay for that book for Mary Jo if it was not written just by me. And I think we enjoyed writing together. And I think one of our strengths as a writing team is that we're of different generations. So we bring different feminist histories to the project. And Paige did her undergrad at Princeton, but has since earned a master's in gender studies at Oxford, and is also a performer and is a novelist and wears all different kinds of hats. And so we kind of have complementary skills. So for this book, I had actually seen these little books in the theater bookshop at the National Theatre in London. And when I saw this collection, and I think at the time Ryan's was not yet done, but I knew he was writing it. I knew my also former student Eric Glover was writing one, and some other scholars who I really admire and respect. And I looked and I could not believe that I didn't see one at the time that was about feminism
Mm.
and feminist approaches in musical theater. So I wrote to the editor, editor at Methuen, who we worked with, Dom O'Hanlon, and the series editors, and said, could we propose this? And again, I just thought it was a project that would be so much stronger if Paige and I did it together, and she was willing to do it, and so we did it. And I will say that, I mean, I think Paige and I agree that it took a lot longer than it might have. All projects take longer than it should, but I think because we had a big topic that had to be in basically 25,000 words, we probably wrote this book 2 or 3 times over. That's a warning to anyone who thinks shorter is easier.
Right.
Shorter is not easier. Um, and we actually had an entire chapter that we cut that had to be cut from the book because it was too long, but we're going to use that chapter in the next project that we're doing together.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
so that's how it came together. And there were some sections, the introduction we really wrote together, trading back and forth. Other chapters we wrote the first draft. One of us wrote the first draft, and then we traded it. But one of the things, and I'm sure Paige has more to say about this, is that we were, there's a lot of different ways to co-write with someone, and we wanted the book to be in one voice. So we
Mm.
might have written this book in dialogue, or we might have written the book to make explicit who wrote each chapter, but we wanted our voice to be unified. And that was actually, I think that part of it was easier than I expected. Some other things were harder, not because of Paige, just because of life. Um, yeah.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
don't know.
And
Paige, do you want to say more about that or
yeah.
anything?
No, everything you said, Stacey. I think definitely the kind of it made sense for one of us to kind of take the lead on a chapter. But as Stacey said, like these chapters ended up kind of getting rewritten various times. And one of the one of the aspects of the voice that I think we bring, our collective voice that we bring to the book is we're certainly making arguments about the musicals that we're looking at, but ultimately we wanted it to be a very questionful text that kind of encourages
Yeah.
the reader to come to their own conclusions, that doesn't, because the point is to show these feminist approaches in action. Our case studies are more about showing you how you go about feminist analysis than saying, like, this is the definitive feminist analysis of this musical. And so having kind of the two of us both look over each chapter and think about each musical meant that each of us would bring something different or notice something else that would add to the argument. And there are certain questions that I'm sure the two of us might have slightly different answers to about each of the musicals that we wrote
Mm.
about. But that's kind of the fun of the project, is to kind of like leave open some further thinking for the reader to think about, well, if you disagree with us, great. Like
Yeah.
write your own kind of analysis of what we're talking about.
I love how you create, both of you, the unified voice, this model of scholarship that I hope to be a part of in the literary criticism world. And I think that it's so refreshing to even hear Stacy that, see, I was like, oh, Stacy just gets pitched to do these projects, but to think of like the chutzpah you have to just say, oh, this isn't here in this field. I need to reach out. And like that is the way that publishing, you know, that you have every right to reach out to the publishers and suggest a project. And I think like writers out there, that's a really powerful um, lesson to learn about like taking the bull by the horns and like recognizing what you can contribute to the field.
Mm,
Um, and like just this way that you model scholarship, both of you together, like yes, you have the musicals that you analyze, like whether they're The Music Man or Suffs or Fun Home. But like you're saying, Paige, it's, I always say to my students, and I think I brought this up to Stacy before, so, I don't need to repeat it. But basically, the short of it is like when you apply an approach to a text, it's like just when you're in an eye exam and like they bring down each lens for you. And I like that whatever musicals we all hold near and dear to our heart, like you both offer us a model, and it's not necessarily about the musicals that you analyze. It's about how you're shaping our perspective to think about gender, sexuality, race, and
hmm.
this intersectionality of identities in these musicals that, we're in the theater to see. So bravo.
Yeah.
Bravo, bravo. Oh,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
no, yeah, thank you for saying that. I think we made specific choices with for a certain kind of coverage in the musicals that we selected, and we might have selected many other different musicals. So
Absolutely.
we knew why we were choosing each of these. And with every one that we chose, we had a lot of different other musicals that we might have chosen. And yeah, and like Paige was saying, we really see this primarily as a methods book.
Hmm.
So in some ways, the readings and the specific examples are really a means to an end. And the end are these methods that we hope other people will take and run with.
Yeah. And I love how much that it is, I like lengthy theoretical text, but I like that it packs a punch because I think that it has, like, as a reader, like, I'm reflecting on the ideas and thinking, because you have worked so hard on concise language, it really like whether it's about, we'll get into like the idea you have about dissonant pleasure, Stacy, which I just find fascinating, or like the way that these heterosexual marriage plots in the golden age and continue on to the modern day. Like it really, I thought it works so nice because it is nice and tight in the language that it really feels powerful. Like every line you've written, both of you together. So
Thank you.
no, it's
Thanks.
it's such an enjoyable read. Oh, and if you're in New York City, Drama Bookshop carries it too.
Yeah.
But shall we start in the golden age in the past, or shall we start from present and work our way backwards?
Let's start with present. You had brought up a question about girl power, women's empowerment, which is kind of where the book goes in the end. Maybe we should start there.
Yeah, that'd be great. So, yeah, there's this whole idea that you present, you know, and when I'm saying you, I'm using it you in the plural form,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Totally.
just
We
so you
got
don't
Yeah.
think I'm like
that.
singling out one of you. But like you both present this idea of like how girl power, women's empowerment are used as marketing slogans and branding tactics. I mean, right, Stacy on the podcast has talked about Wicked. We see it with Six. So you say though, okay, just because a show is saying that it's full of girl power, or empowering women, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a feminist musical. Like, can you both unpack that a little? Like, what do you mean by that? Because I think to a modern day audience, that actually is probably maybe a provocative statement to make.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the really exciting and challenging things about where we are today in politics and feminism as feminist scholars is that the idea of feminism has kind of so many different definitions. It always has, because the movement has always been multivariant, and there have been different kind of branches of the movement and different focuses. But this popular feminism that you're talking about right now, there was a time when kind of identifying oneself as a feminist publicly itself was a very radical act. And people didn't want to call themselves a feminist. Feminists were like radicals who were burning bras in the streets and hated all men. And, like there's this kind of like scary idea, or exciting, depending on who you are, of what kind of a feminist was. And in our current day and age, feminism is a topic that's talked about and adopted by people across the political spectrum with a lot of different opinions about women's rights, and who would consider themselves champions of women's and girls, or of women's empowerment, but have very different ideas of what that actually looks like in practice and what that means. And the exciting part of living in that time is that seeing, very public, commercial, and highly consumed properties identifying themselves with feminism is a step forward. However, there's kind of the question is how deep that feminism actually goes. And this idea of popular feminism is one that was kind of theorized in the last kind of like 10 years, as a way of describing this, how kind of corporations can do like hashtag International Women's Day, or there's mugs that say smash the patriarchy that you can buy at your local chain store. But that's kind of a mass marketed, palatable version of feminism that people can feel good participating in. And in some ways, that's perhaps a gateway drug into kind of deeper engagement with kind of like larger issues and structural things. But if it stops there, the question remains of how deep it's going. So that's kind of how we frame these modern musicals, that each one kind of is dealing with gender differently. And there are these musicals on Broadway. We talk specifically about six in our book, but we're at a moment right now where there's actually a lot that kind of have this girl power edge. I think like Heather's being revived off Broadway as part of this. I mean, it started, Legally Blonde was earlier, but Legally Blonde, Lysistrata Jones, Once Upon a One More Time had this vibe, which was this Britney Spears jukebox musical. And again, each of these musicals is different. And Juliet definitely comes to mind. And Juliet loves that it's touting its kind of like gender, it's both its feminism and its gender diversity with its non-binary character, which is so rarely seen on Broadway stages. And so there's a lot of wins that can come from this kind of feminism, in that they're getting these kinds of ideas to a large audience. And there's still the question of kind of like, okay, but what actually is the musical saying? And if just because the musical says, hey, we're feminist, we have women on stage, doesn't necessarily mean that the story is telling a feminist or deep story about who we can still ask questions about who are these women? What do they want? What do the stories tell us about what womanhood means? And that might have a very different kind of feeling when you like peel back the layers, or there might be something exciting and deeper there. So I hope that answered the question.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, and it kind of like also begs the question that at the forefront, you both are saying like this book, if you hope to like have us both weigh in on whether or not the musical you're watching is feminist or anti-feminist, this is not the book. Like you're not both making judgments on like that's the feminist musical, that's the anti-feminist musical. Like, and why was that important to kind of say you're not doing a type of binary, like placing each musical into the pro or the anti-feminist messaging?
Welcome to Severed, a podcast week dropping new episodes every Monday. Severed True Crime and Severed Paranormal episodes deep dive into murder, mysteries, and the otherworldly in a concise format. a 7-minute story to frame the case with thoughtful analysis, and our usual banter.
We sometimes find the lighter side of darker cases. We offer 3 spin-off shows, Severed Strange Stories, Severed Haunted You, and Severed Serial Killers, that highlight the unusual to lighthearted topics from the digital dumpsters of true crime, haunted universities, and the minds of madness like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer.
We are your co-hosts. I'm Harry Chambers.
And I'm Drew Hudson. Listen on all major podcast platforms, including Rogue Media Network and Radio Garden State. Follow us on Instagram at severed_podcast.
Are you a fan of classic Hollywood movies?
Are you a fan of queer cinema?
Then do we have the podcast for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christian Garcia.
And I'm Luke Del Mar.
And we are your hosts of That Old Gay Classic Cinema, where we take a look at some of the greatest films of all time and analyze them through a queer theoretical lens.
Let's be honest. LGBTQIA+ people have been a part of Hollywood since its inception, and this podcast celebrates those artists and entertainers of yesteryear while also taking a closer look at the queer-coded characters and stories in classic Hollywood films long before queer representation entered the mainstream.
So follow us down the road of classic cinema as we give you a guide to some of the films that touched our hearts, brains, and even gave us courage to be ourselves.
You can listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
All right, listeners, we're ready for our close-up.
Yeah.
Well, I think.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Stacey.
go on page. No, you go on page.
Okay, I'll
You can
start, and then you should definitely add more. But I'm so glad you said that, because that was one of the things that we found really important, because this kind of yes, no, feminist, anti-feminist is not actually kind of helpful or kind of good scholarship, because it's nothing is that clear cut, nothing is that kind of black and white, and the two of us sitting here shouldn't be the arbiters of what is and is not a feminist show, or what should or should not be done on stages. Those are much larger questions. And I think just thinking, is this or isn't this feminist, doesn't actually answer kind of the deeper questions that our book was trying to get readers to engage with, which was, what is gender doing on stage? What is this show saying about gender? Often those answers are much more complex and specific to each show and time period that you're engaging with the musical in. And it's the exciting thing about musical theater as a scholar is that the text itself is constantly changing, unlike kind of literary scholarship, which I also do, where you've got the novel, the thing was written, it's all within these 2 pages, and the words on the page are what you have, and even that we can all have a million different interpretations of what they meant by one sentence and things like that. With the musical, we've got the words on the page, we've got the music, we've got the actors who are making choices every night, possibly differently night to night, about how they perform a certain line. Each director is going to come in with different choices. There's lighting, there's costumes, there's the venue in which you saw the show, the mood you were in when you walked into that theater and saw it, and what were you thinking about beforehand. All of that is going to influence your experience of a work. And that's also why saying this show's feminist, this show's not, doesn't actually work, because the experience is always changing. I think Evita is a great example of this that we talk about in the book. Is every time you see a stage production of Evita, there's going to be a different take on Ava, a different take on Shay, a different take on Juan Perón. Different directors and different actors are going to bring something different to those roles, and so you're going to see a different gendered structure of power dynamics and a different relationship between all those characters play out each production you see. And some of them might feel feminist to you, some of them might not, but that doesn't necessarily say that show is definitively one thing or the other. Yeah,
it's kind of like when, you teach Antigone, like there's that book by Helen Morales, Antigone Rising, and like she reads her as this like feminist role model for the modern day age. And like when I bring that up with my students, they have so many different ways into that question. Like, oh, well, is she a feminist? Like, that's such a layered question. It's like kind of saying, is Achilles and Patroclus, a queer couple? It's there's a
Yeah.
lot of historical messaging that you have to unpack. But yeah, Stacy, I mean, I know
And I
you were going to
think,
offer something too.
yeah, well, I think, I mean, I'm glad you tied it back to your students because I think that we really see this book as provoking conversation the same way in a seminar or sitting around a table having dinner with your friends, you would want to open up the discussion
Yeah.
and thumbs up, thumbs down. This is feminist, this is not. First of all, as Paige said earlier, the history of feminism and the feminist movement, if we can even, feminist movements, keeps changing. So and even though we have, I think, like 2 pages about the history of feminist movement in the U.S. and U.K. It's very short, just to set a little historical context. We are always just constantly trying to open up conversation, and as over time, and we hope this book will have a long life
Absolutely.
over time as feminism in the culture changes. And I mean, right now, my students seem very comfortable calling themselves feminist, taking a feminist approach, but that could be different in 5 years. Who knows how it's going to be? But we still would hope that this book would be useful because of the questions that Paige articulated about what gender is doing, because gender has been and always will be a fundamental building block of musical theater. Whether or not a musical is about a heterosexual love story, which most of them are, it,
Mhm.
it will still be a key tool of the form.
Yeah. Well, can we get into the messiness a little of,
Sure.
well, okay. So before we were recording, we were talking about 1776, and I didn't see I guess what we'll call gender reversal, or I don't know. Is there a specific term when you like swap the gender roles? I don't know. I
Yeah, I
feel
mean,
like
it was an all female
female
identifying and
cast,
not
right?
and non-binary cast, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so
it was mostly gender swapped because most of the roles in that musical are male identifying roles.
yeah, so in a case like, what they did with 1776, and it doesn't change like they didn't change the source material, right? Like they weren't changing the pronouns, they weren't trying to like
No.
fit it into modern day nomenclature. Um, so it was a revival with women and non-binary actors as the founding father characters. So, well, and even I guess also as Martha Jefferson and Abigail Adams.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So like the queer dynamic came in the identity of the actors themselves. Um, which I think is interesting. Do you think that there's more power in when something like that happens, or when something like Audra McDonald takes on Gypsy and there's a race consciousness going on where Mama Rose and her family, you see it through this lens of, oh, the stage mother as a black woman has a very different significance than like when I saw Patti LuPone as Mama Rose, for example.
Yeah.
Uh, do you want to
You want to
start,
start
Paige?
either way?
All right, I'll start. I'll just say a couple things and then you can chime in. I mean, I
Yeah.
think those are two really interesting examples because I think that theatrically and politically they have completely different projects. Their
Mm,
goals are absolutely different. I think that Audra McDonald as Gypsy, George C. Wolf was pretty much taking the show as it is and then reconceiving it with a black from the perspective of a black family. So Rose and the girl and June and Louise were black, and that changes nothing and everything about that musical. It does not change the fact that it's about a stage mother. It does not change the fact that it's about a mother-daughter relationship. It does not change the fact that it's examining the economics of the United States in the first part of the 20th century. What changes is that it's from the perspective of a black family and that a black woman with black daughters, one who can pass for white, maybe, and then the other who can't, would have a very different set of challenges than
mm,
a white mother at that same period. And So it changes the musical because of the casting, because of the race conscious casting. That was a different project for 1776. So 1776, I think, was more about how, by putting women and non-binary performers in these roles typically played by men, it calls attention to the performance of masculinity
Mm,
of the founding fathers, and
mhm,
how the idea of the founding fathers are the founding fathers,
mm,
these guys who sat in a room and argued about stuff and formed our country. And one of the things that I thought was really cool about the production was at the beginning of the show, and this was a few years ago, but Paige and I happened to see it
Literally
together.
happens to.
Yeah, I mean, there have been many more shows that we've not seen together, but we did happen to see this together. And I remember we were both really struck by, I hope I'm not, I might be mistaking the beginning a little bit, but basically the women come on stage and they're wearing kind of white shirts and knickers or
mm,
short pants, and then we watch them put on their jackets and put on their shoes and lace up their shoes. So from the beginning, it's signaling to us this is a performance of masculinity. And let's look at what happens when female identifying or non-binary bodies and people who are coming with those kinds of experiences play the most male of male roles imaginable.
mm.
And how does that make us think about American history, for example? So that's what I would say about those two shows that are both super interesting and very different theatrical projects.
Mm. Yeah,
And
Paige,
anything you
what
want
would
to
you?
add, Paige?
yeah, I'll just add to kind of one of the things that we talk about in the book is one of these approaches is looking at page versus stage, right? So what we're talking about right now is how the choices you make when you stage a musical shift how you view the text itself, because neither of these productions changed any of the text that was on the
Hmm.
page. And we're looking at this question of intersectionality, which is how various identifying identifiers or identities intersect on stage, right? Audra McDonald as a black woman of a certain age in this role, those are all things that she's bringing to the table, are going to change how you view that performance. And I'll just add kind of uh, I think the production of 1776 we're discussing also I think was very conscious of race and intentionally cast a very racially diverse cast and did some made some choices with staging with and costuming that kind of brought attention to the different heritages that were represented on stage.
Mm-hmm.
I yeah, there were different costumes that I think were intentionally evoking the identities of the actors who were playing those roles beyond the identity of John and Abigail Adams' historical
Yeah.
identities. And at the same time, I think, as Stacy said, we saw this act of them putting on these identities and grappling with what does it mean to play these men, these white men who created this country that now these we have to live with. And that is a different relationship to race conscious casting than Gypsy. Gypsy was saying, we're watching Gypsy and it is a
Mhm.
black family. These characters are now black. 1776, we're watching the the white male founding fathers, and at the same time, these actors who don't necessarily fit those identities play those characters. And that gap was kind of intentional. And that's something we talk about is those are two different ways to approach kind of a conscious race casting.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so 1776 is like Hamilton. I mean, in
Hmm.
terms of race, it's
Yes.
cast like Hamilton. Doesn't
And I
change
think
the,
was
it does,
intentionally engaging with Hamilton, which
absolutely.
cast this racially diverse cast, but did not comment on it. Was kind of like, we're going to have this racially diverse cast who are going to play these characters, but not necessarily engage with, well, what does it mean for them to play these characters beyond just the celebration of let's put this music that comes from these particular traditions, specifically like hip hop, R&B,
Yeah.
these that artists of color have created and spearheaded and fuse that with this history of the white men who created the country. Like that was where that fusion was happening, but we didn't see like they did have this kind of like everybody was in these white outfits, but we didn't feel a heaviness to them putting on these roles. I didn't feel, at least when I saw Hamilton, versus I felt in
Mm,
1776
mm.
there was a heaviness and a kind of wear on the actors of like we're living with this history and it's not necessarily good versus the
Yeah,
kind of
Right.
joy of
yeah,
Hamilton, which is like let's imagine
yeah,
this immigrant story
yeah,
with a kind of different joyous cast
yeah,
than it
yeah.
necessarily was in 17 whatever.
Yeah, well,
Hmm.
it's like an up by your bootstraps. In my opinion, Hamilton is very like a nostalgia driven,
Oh
or
yeah.
there's a very optimistic bend to it
Yes.
where I was actually um like the whole moment that happens with the South Carolina delegate, and he like calls out the hypocrisy of the North with John Adams, like, oh, you think you're so above and beyond and highfalutin against slavery. Well, let me tell you how you're affected by the triangle trade. And when I saw it staged at Paper Mill, there was like the whip sound and the lights. It was like really powerful. And because I think 1776 is really well written. And
Yeah.
it is called a musical play because it really acts like a play too, right? Because like
Hmm.
Stacey's, you're saying you're with them as they're debating. Um and having them at Paper Mill cast a black actor as the soldier, I thought showed how he's on the front line of war and these white colonizers are so privileged in their positions. So like
Right.
I think too, in my opinion, 1776 and Hamilton, like if I was teaching that history, like I think they pair really
Oh yeah.
interestingly
Absolutely.
well. But like you even say, right, the Schuyler sisters, a lot have, you know, who consume Hamilton see them as like the centerpiece of femininity, of a female empowered trio, almost like, are they a Spice Girls group? Are they like a
Hmm.
girl group? But you're saying it's not necessarily like that's where the women's empowerment messaging, you know, are these three sisters, do they have agency and are they fully, you know, able to make decisions outside of the control of men? Like is that just not what the point is of the musical? Is it about just the genres they're singing? The spring season is here, which means there's a new issue of the Gay and Lesbian Review called Victorian Times, all about my favorite period of literature, the 19th century. And you'll see a rugged Walt Whitman on the cover and the dandy Oscar Wilde. Well, guess what? My first article is now published in the Gay and Lesbian Review called Once Upon a Time in Camden. It's the intro to my book, which looks into their queer literary relationship, but also Whitman and Wilde's homoerotic poetics, and specifically what Whitman does with male same sex desire before the category of homosexuality even existed. Like, how did he even express this in his poetry? Well, you'll have to read my book to find out. Book coming soon. If you know of a publisher, let me know. I'm shopping around right now. But this Victorian issue is so special with the Gay and Lesbian Review. There's articles on Dr. Jekyll and Victor Frankenstein. I'm about to see The Bride, which I can't wait to see. And right, Guillermo del Toro's new Frankenstein is all the rage. There's an article on Monte Cristo's Women in Love, Tchaikovsky's Men. I love Tchaikovsky's ballet. I'm particularly an admirer of The Sleeping Beauty, one on Captain Cobb. There's film and TV shows reviewed like Heated Rivalry, Boots, Kiss of the Spider Woman, which, if you don't know, I had an episode with Jeremy Fox from the Gay and Lesbian Review, the managing editor, and Colin Carmen and Joseph Federico, and we talked all about Heated Rivalry. You have to listen to it. And Kiss of the Spider Woman, I keep recommending to everyone. It is an astounding film. Boots, I actually had the creator Greg Cope White on the podcast too. You'll have to listen to his interview. Also, if you haven't heard our episode on the kink issue of the magazine, it's really, really interesting. And the ethnography one. And yes, there will be an episode soon about the Victorian issue. So get your hands on the Gay and Lesbian Review. The digital subscription is really easy to get, glreview.org. The print subscription also, head on over to the website, click subscribe, use the promo code ITBR choice. You get a free issue of the magazine. Choose the Victorian issue, will you? So head to their Instagram, their TikTok. I love the Gay and Lesbian Review. I get so many book recommendations, TV show, film recommendations. One of the films that I can't wait to watch is in this issue. I want to say it's pronounced Pillion or Pillion. I think I made it French there, with Alexander Skarsgård. So enjoy your reading, everyone. And if you're reading the Gay and Lesbian Review, please reach out to me. I want to let them know, that you all listening to this podcast are reading their magazine. Now that the spring semester is here, I am so excited to let you all know about a publisher, an independent publisher that's celebrating 40 years of great books called Broadview Press. I love Broadview Press. I have so many of their editions of classic literature like Wuthering Heights, which is coming out soon, and it's our book club choice. And they have so many academic books for instructors and for students and the general public. So I've had so many exciting guests on, from guests talking about The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, guests talking about vampire literature, horror literature. I'm looking at you, Jeffrey Andrew Weinstock, whose book actually just came out called Horror Theory. Look it up. And I cannot wait because I have two exciting guests coming on soon. And I've recorded their episodes, so I know that it's going to be such an interesting conversation. The first is Rachel Tukalski, who wrote a book called Writing on Fire, a fierce yet friendly guide to writing humanities essays in college. I've used excerpts of it for my Writing 2 course at Montclair. It has gone over so well. I just love what Rachel does. And we get into this in our episode about this metaphor about writing on fire, like how that's a great way to think about free flowing, brainstorming, creative ideas, and getting into that flow state, which, as Rachel explains, happens not just in writing, but in many other avenues. And then the other guest that I have on is David Starkey, who wrote a book called Academic Writing Now, a brief guide for busy students. It is designed to cover the basics of a college writing course in a concise, student-friendly format. Each chapter concentrates on a crucial element of composing an academic essay and is capable of being read in a single sitting, which, for a generation, myself included, I think all of us now, just consumed by digital media or just this attention grabbing technology, reading in a single sitting is definitely a plus. So head to Broadview Press, use the promo code Ivory Tower, and you'll get 20% off every single book in their collection. There's also a really cool digital library collection they have. So if you're a librarian, take a look at that. Message me. If you're a librarian, I'd be happy to show you what that new collection looks like. And I hope you all enjoy your reading.
Yeah. I feel that connects really well to one of the other questions we talked about discussing on this, which was about how like powerhouse female performers change how you see the roles. So I feel like it might be good to segue into
let's
that.
Do it.
Yeah. Do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Or do you want to just talk about that, Paige?
Yeah, go for it, Paige. Like, do you have an example of?
Well, I think just that's another aspect there is I think the performers in those roles are so charismatic and so incredible and have become kind of like have kind of developed their own kind of following. And I feel like a lot of these like a lot of the women who have played the Schuyler sisters are, I think um it's not quite like a diva role where there's just like this like one woman who becomes like larger than life, but I think like
Mm.
I think about like the original Schuyler sisters and I feel like uh I can like think of those actors as much as I can think of those characters, and they kind of like created those roles. And
Yes,
then there was
yes.
all the like there's the different casts. So then when it's touring in Chicago or whatever, then you can see, oh, she's playing Angelica here and she's playing Mariah here. And like, what does that
Hmm.
look like?
Hmm.
And I think just having such charismatic, extremely talented women and some like, total stars of the Broadway stage have circled through those roles and played
Hmm.
and you can kind of fan cast, oh my God, I'd love to see so and so as Angelica or so
Yeah.
as Eliza. Like,
Yeah.
or oh, she worked with him on In the Heights and now she's playing her in Hamilton. Like I feel like there's this the fan aspect of it and the kind of um there is the like seeing three women sing really well together makes you excited and have fun, and think, wow, look at these like three incredible women as you're watching three incredible women performers perform really well,
Yeah.
regardless of whether the characters actually have the kind of agency or ability to take up space in their narrative that the actors do in the numbers that they're in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before I had wanted to say that I appreciated when Paige noted that one of the methods that we talk about is page versus stage, because one of the things that we try to do in the book, and this is very much thanks to our editor who encouraged us to do this, is in each chapter to really highlight the methods that we're using, because in each different chapter, we tend to use we could use pretty much every method in every we have enumerated 6 methods that we just basically made up. We probably could have come up with more or had it, well, I'm not sure we could have any fewer than 6, but and so in each chapter with the readings that we do, we stress certain of the methods. And the page versus stage is one that obviously could be applied to absolutely any musical for all the reasons that Paige talked about. And then another one that we talk about a lot is affective dissonance. And that was a phrase that I used. I mean, it's not an idea that's not fairly common sense to any of us who has seen a musical and experienced it and loved it and hated it at the same time, which is the situation of every feminist critic, that you're so caught up and the music is great and it's fantastic and the performance is amazing and the women are victimized or dismissed or demoralized or diminished in some way, or in the case of Hamilton, are really only means to an end.
Mm.
They are all in love with Hamilton. They have no other purpose in this musical than to be in love with him and show how lovable or not lovable at different times. That is all they are doing in the show. At the same time, they sing and they dance and they're so charismatic. So that feeling of, I love this and I hate it, or I love this, but there's something icky about it, that we're calling affective dissonance, like that is the feeling affect of things that don't go together, that are dissonant, the same way a chord, two different notes in music could be dissonant. And we use that term because it is so emotional. And then we're hoping, as we try to articulate, okay, why is that? Is this so much fun, but it's irritating me at the same time? Or why am I so uncomfortable even as I'm enjoying it so much? And we also, I mean, I think another thing that we stress so much in the book is that we embrace those contradictions. We don't
Yeah.
feel that criticism needs to have just one straight line and that's the argument and you can't vary from it. And I think one place where this becomes really apparent is in the 6th chapter, where we uh, share the perspectives of feminist scholars who disagree about 6. And
Mm.
these feminist scholars say, yes, this is a feminist musical. These feminist scholars say it's not. And it's important to us to share those different perspectives. And in most of I think in all of the chapters, we put into conversation scholars who disagree with one another to demonstrate that you can come in you can read these shows from different points of view.
Yeah. Well, and oh, also, if we go an extra like 15 minutes to 3:15, is that a problem for either of you?
I'm okay.
You're good? Okay.
3:15 is
Is
great.
that okay,
Yeah,
Paige?
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yep.
Yeah.
So, okay. This example, I'm not sure exactly. Like, I think it has that, dissonant pleasure, like where you might get frustrated, but it also has that powerhouse girl group slash, breakout star with Effie White, which is Dreamgirls. And which
Oh,
hopefully, I know Stacy, we're planning to see it. Hopefully, Paige, you'll join us in the fall when it comes back to Broadway. Um, and I find it so fascinating as a musical because the women are the centerpiece. The tension between Dina and Effie are based on reality with the Supremes. I mean, and then Mary Wilson writes a book in 1986 called Dreamgirl: My Life as a Supreme, based on using the title of Dreamgirls. So
hmm.
it's like just this meta, like it just keeps getting Beyonce being part of Destiny's Child, and she's in Dreamgirls. It's like a musical like that, right? There is a lot of racial dynamics going on where, in my opinion, it was the first musical that really looked at um, black men and women and their relations together and how patriarchy functions in this dynamic, but also in the music industry. And it's like a very, layered musical. But my question would be, what do you do in a case like that where there are there's a girl group, but they don't function like the Schuyler sisters, in my opinion. They function more for commercial consumption. Like they're part of an industry. Like, is Dreamgirls, how in your book do you think Dreamgirls would figure?
Remind me, when did Dreamgirls open originally?
Um,
780 or
1981.
81? So kind of the
Yeah.
mega musical moment.
Yeah. If I remember, it was right with Phantom
Yeah,
or
our Phantom would have been a couple years later. It
later,
was right
right?
after Evita. It was two
Oh,
years
okay.
after Evita.
Yeah.
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 1981.
Yeah. Which Evita, I mean, talk about the six pop star, Henry VIII ex-wives. Rachel Zegler is Evita the pop star in the new production that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. That's definitely his take. Yeah. Jamie Lloyd's take is this pop star version.
right. And Dina and Effie, I mean, Dina is the ultimate pop diva. Like um, right. She's, a, has a mass market appeal compared to Effie, right? Like that's the
Right.
tension is who does the American public, who do they think they can market? Um, and I don't know. Why maybe is that just like a social critique of, what's digestible to the American public, specifically with, black women um, having to check off more boxes
Mm-hmm.
in this kind of competition space.
I think what's interesting about this conversation is we're talking about kind of the diva on a few different levels, right? Like
Hmm.
Dreamgirls is specifically about these women in this industry and how they are going to market themselves within this industry. So like regardless of like who's in that role, if it's three unknown actresses, that's still what it's about, right? It's still about this kind of like diva story. Um, and what kind of I think that what's great about that musical is it is really about this relationship between these three women. I don't know the musical super well, but even be they have relationships with men. That's definitely part of the musical as well. But there is this kind of like there there's more music there's more like named women who have something to do in that musical than other musicals, and three is not that many, but it's still more than some,
Yeah.
than 1776, for
Yeah,
example.
the men take a backstage in Dreamgirls, and that's not a
Yes.
controversial opinion. That's
Yes, yeah.
like
Yeah.
what
Um,
happens. Yeah.
but then you also talked about this kind of other layer of who is playing these roles and that
Hmm.
kind of like the diva quality that actors can have. And I see that there's kind of like two versions of this. There's a actress who becomes a star like through the role, or her version of that role becomes the definitive version of that role, or a version that haunts other performances. Obviously, I think Patti LuPone as Evita like is a great example of she has gone on to kind of have this diva status, which was in part because of kind of her performance as Evita. And then the kind of second version of that is someone who is famous outside of the theater world who then comes in and plays the role. Which there's some of these castings have happened in Dreamgirls. So that Chicago on Broadway is kind of the most famous example of like now has like every famous person ever who's famous from from reality TV to the world of drag to the world of music production can cycle in and play those. And it's a musical about fame. So it's so interesting to get someone who's famous from outside.
Yes,
Now
I'm
we've
glad
got
you brought
Megan,
up Chicago. Yeah, that's a great
So
example.
Megan Thee Stallion is now in Moulin Rouge on Broadway. So
Yeah.
that's another stunt casting. And obviously stunt casting is done to kind of like bring butts into seats. People want to see so and so play whatever role. But why I bring that up is that that's kind of like this diva from outside of the theater world who's coming in and bringing, I mean, Madonna played Evita in the movie. She's
Right.
now this diva who's come in and played, and that was the first Evita as a pop star. I would argue that then Jamie Lloyd is saying, okay, we're gonna really stage that of like Evita as a pop star and stage the show engaging with that idea.
But it still doesn't take away Eva Peron's authoritarian fascist bent and anti-Semitism.
Like totally, and I think
But I
that's
mean,
what's
is that really
that's
in the musical though? Like if I remember right, I don't really think her controversial statements are
she's pretty mixed in the
she's
musical,
mixed.
and
Okay, okay.
I
It's
Yeah.
would
been a little while
argue
since I saw it.
without kind
Mm.
of like spoiling anything about the Jamie Lloyd production too much because it, you know, it may transfer, whatever. But he comes down hard on Ava at times, and she does things in that musical
Mm.
that you don't agree with, and her violence is also forefronted in that musical, as well as her
Oh,
pop star
okay.
quality is in his particular staging. But
Okay,
to
the
kind
one
of
I saw was very different. I saw the Ricky Martin
yeah.
one, and that
Okay. Yeah. Which doesn't. And that's another
I was not a huge
example.
fan, but yeah.
But here we go. We're back to page versus stage, how different directors are going to
Yep.
bring different themes that are going to come to the fore. You're going to walk away with a different take on this woman character depending on who you saw in the role, how the director staged it, and the politics of the day and
Yeah,
what we're
yeah.
currently talking about and how we feel about the characters. I feel like Chicago's a great example of that. Stacey, you talk in
Yeah.
we talk in the book, but you were the one who kind of like brought this example to my mind when we worked on it of the kind of different layers of history of Chicago and how it's been
Mm.
uh, received by different audiences at different times differently.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, let's talk about Chicago. I mean, what
Yeah.
makes that musical so fascinating as
Yeah.
being part of the book?
Yeah, well, before we get to
No, go
Chicago, I
ahead.
just wanted to,
Sorry, I brought us
no,
to.
no, no, not at all. I just wanted to loop back or kind of give credit to the scholar who first wrote about this idea of haunting,
Mm,
Marvin
Yes.
Carlson, who is one of my mentors, who's written
mm,
1,000 books, including a book called The Haunted Stage,
mm.
which, like all great scholarship, articulates a theory that once he says it, you feel like, how could this have ever not been said? And so his idea about haunting, and this is kind of looping back to the examples that Paige was working through, is it could be that a character a character is haunted by the original actor or the first actor who played that role. So
Mm.
anyone who, if you don't know the history of Evita, it won't make a difference. But if you know the history of this musical and you know Patti LuPone created that role, then whoever plays Ava will always be haunted by the memory of LuPone having played that role.
That was me. That was me when I
Yes,
saw the
yes,
revival. And
that was.
unfortunately, I had Patty's
Oh
voice
yeah,
so in my head, and it was just, and
yeah,
I don't want to fault I'm not going to fault the actress, but it's so hard where Rachel Zegler is a powerhouse voice. Like, what she's doing with the last 5 years, the clips I'm seeing has, like, she just changes the dynamic because of her voice.
yeah,
Or Leah
and
Michelle
because
and Funny Girl.
right,
That
right.
was, we could get into that. That's a whole
That's
drama
right.
there.
Exactly. Yes, yes. And these incredible actors who also bring their own unique charisma and their own stardom and their own fan base. So the partly the reason that the original or first carries so much weight is because that's typically when a cast album was introduced. And in the days before we could watch everything on YouTube, or there were so many illegal bootlegs, and now more and more legitimate recorded productions. If you heard Patti LuPone, if you heard the album with Patti LuPone 8 million times, then whoever you would go to see next, your memory would be haunted by that. So the role might be haunted by a certain actor, or a diva herself is haunted by all the roles that she played in the past. So when you see Patty play Joanne in Company, in the revival of Company, when you hear her, you still, if you saw her in Evita in 1980 or 79 or 80 or 81, around that time when she was in it, you would still, even when she's singing Ladies Who Lunch, you kind of hear her singing "Don't Cry Argentina" at the same time.
Yeah.
So I just want to give Carlson credit for this
Yes.
idea, which is so fundamental, not only to our book, but I think to most most theater scholarship, this idea of the haunted stage. So then we started talking about this other idea that also was not original to us, triple historicity.
Yes.
And the theater historian Freddie Rokem was the first person who, again, articulated this idea that is so obvious for any of us who works in theater, but he was the one who was articulate and smart enough to say it, which is that all theater, and so including musicals, takes place in 3 times at once. So it takes place when the show is set. So in the case of Chicago in the 1920s, it takes place when the show was first produced. In the case of Chicago, 1975, and it takes place today, whenever today is. And if there are other revivals at certain times, it can also take place during those times. So for Chicago, we would add also 1996, because that was the City Center Encore's revival, which is the production that's now still running all these many years later. So the idea with triple historicity is that these different moments, these different historical moments, are existing all at once in a production of a show. And if you focus on different times in the history of a show, you'll get different readings of the show. So for Chicago, it's always going to be about female murderesses and
Yeah. The
these
Mary
two women, the
Murderesses
Mary
of Cook County
murderesses,
Jail.
right? And
Yeah.
they're striving for fame and fortune, and it's always going to be about the media and corruption and stardom. It's always going to have this super fun. Wait, was Bob Fosse the original choreographer, or was it Sam Ryan
Yes.
King? Fosse
Yeah.
was.
Bob
Okay,
Fosse.
so it's always going to have this really cool. Sorry, I forgot that
No,
momentarily.
but who was with
This
Gwen
really
Verdon,
awesome.
who
Right, was with
originated
Yeah.
Roxy. Yeah.
Right, who originated Roxy. Yes, I'm already thinking about the revival with Anne Ryan King. So,
Yeah.
so it's always going to have that cool Fosse choreography and the jazzy Kander Nebb score. All of that will be there. But when the show opened in the mid 70s, it flopped. And some might say, well, the concept in some ways was too simple or simplistic for what was going on in musical theater at the time. Many people, many commentators later said it was because it was just a few years after Watergate, and people did not want to see this negative, critical, very dark show. And also, it was maybe in our history a little bit too early, or maybe too close for comfort, to be so critical and satirical of celebrity in the media. So the show did not do well at the time.
Except,
But
I'm sorry, not to,
oh, yeah, yeah, it did do
question,
well
but
at the time.
because there is a full recording that exists on YouTube with
Oh,
Liza Minnelli when she took over, because she was the
oh,
first stunt cast person. There's a history. She took
uh-huh,
over when Gwen Verdon was out, and the
ah,
audience is cheering after every number. It's like Carrie. The audience
uh-huh.
loved it, so it's not a flop in the sense that the audience
Okay.
wasn't dedicated to it. They loved
But
it.
how long did it run for?
I don't know how long. I'd have to look that up, but it was
Yeah.
very popular with the audience.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
great. Well, thank you
Yeah.
for that excellent
Yeah.
historical correction.
Yeah.
Um, and that's actually a good example of a show where audiences loved it and critics did not. So
Yeah.
when it was restaged, when it was revived at City Center in 1996 and then moved to Broadway, it was and continues to be hugely successful. And scholars have said that there were a number of reasons for that, partly because by the mid 90s, we were living in a cynical, media
Mm-hmm.
conscious, media saturated culture. And so the things that might have seemed too dark or inappropriate in a musical, the sex, the violence, women murdering people, all of that just seemed more palatable and entertaining by the 1990s. And also by the 1990s, there had been so many more different kinds of shows. Sondheim's musicals mostly
Mm.
happened between the mid 70s and the 90s. So there was different kinds of music. There were different degrees of elaborateness of staging. We were post mega musicals, but also post the kind of boutique musicals, and that there was probably more acceptance of women who were strong and violent and
Yeah.
competitive with each other, and probably a more sanguine attitude towards corruption and a media saturated culture. And now that it's moved into the space, what you guys were talking about before, where stars are cycling in and out, it's
Yeah.
become a completely different commodity. I mean, I would say it's so far from what the original Chicago was, because now it's a vehicle for all these other performers to come through. And I also think with the closing of Phantom,
Mm.
it holds a certain place in New York City theatrical
Yeah.
culture. I don't know, Paige, you might have something. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's all I love how you articulated that. And I think it's interesting because the show is about the effort to gain fame and the fleetingness of that
Mm.
fame. Like, because the point is, like,
Right.
Roxy gets famous and then it's gone, like that. And like she and Velma then, like, the kind of end of it is kind of envisioning this duo show that they do to kind of like keep their fame going, which may or
Yeah.
may not be a reality or might be a dream that they have, depending on, each version kind of, I think, has
Mm.
like a little take on whether that's like this kind of like envisioned future or whether they do kind of go on to get their vaudeville show and get famous again. And so it's so interesting that that show is the show that you've got all these people who get really famous in other ways coming through and being those characters. I literally saw an ad Tuesday night because I was like in Times Square and I was
Yeah. Yeah.
seeing ads, and it said it had like I think Whitney Levitt, who's it was Roxy right now, was very famous for reality TV, and it had like her and Chicago was way at the bottom, and it said like "girl gone viral" or something, like was the like hash like line, which the idea of like virality being attributed to this musical from the 1920s, when the idea of like going viral was like not a
Amazing.
thing, but of course
Mhm.
it's this layering on of our idea of going viral to the experience that Roxy is having. And I think the fact that this production of Chicago has this kind of stripped down aesthetic that's not very period costumes. Like everybody's kind of in these like black, like
Right.
kind of
Net.
timeless, like fishnet
Yeah.
Mhm.
sexy
Mhm.
pieces, I think
Yeah.
also lets it kind of live in both times at once, because you're not necessarily seeing her dressed totally in like a outfit from the 1920s. You're seeing this kind of timeless figure, and we're lucky that Cantor and Ebb loved altos, which we love, but also means that people of varying singing talents have been able to come in and play Roxy and Velma
Yes,
because you
yes.
don't need to have Rachel Zegler's singing voice to play Roxy or Velma because a lot of it is talk singy and it's a comfortable
Yeah.
register for those
Oh, that's such
characters
a
to
good
be.
point.
Yeah,
That's such a good
Yeah.
yeah.
point. Yeah.
And that Roxy, her dancing can either be um, pared down or it can be amped up. Like you can either
Yeah.
like
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have to say the best Roxy I've ever seen is Bianca Mariquin.
Hmm.
Incredible. I'm
Hmm.
not a huge fan of the stunt casting that's happened because they're not all, at a certain like
Right.
Velma's never stunt casted. I don't think she is because she is such a strong dancer.
I think
Like with
it's
the
less
chair
frequent.
number.
It's less
Yeah.
frequent. Yeah,
Like you'd
there's
have to
been
be very
some, but
trained. Yeah.
it's more Roxy than Velma. It tends to
Oh,
be.
and to
Yeah.
answer Stacy's question, it lasted for 2 years. It went
Oh,
for 936
Okay.
performances, which I think in our standard would be pretty good right now.
our
For
standard, our standard now, yes, it would be pretty good,
and
but
I'm
I
not
don't
sure
think
in the
that's.
70s if that like was a good run or a
Yeah, I'm
normal.
not sure. I'm not sure if what it would have been in the 70s. I think it would have been okay.
Okay, yeah. It would have
But a
been
part of
like
it, it
yeah.
depends if they made their money back.
Well, that's true. But I also want to
Hmm.
say too that it's so fascinating because again, I know we've been focusing, and which we should, because you focus on the like feminist aspects, but I also think another musical at the same around the same time that Fosse was doing is the dark war comedy of Pippin and like what
Right,
happens
right,
with
right.
the leading player and Ben Vereen and
Hmm.
um like that also was um, digging into elements that, when it gets revived, we then have, right, the swapping of Ben Vereen for Patina Miller, and we have a female
Yes.
leading player.
Mm.
So,
Hmm.
like,
Which I
Hmm.
think
yeah,
hugely changes that musical. I have not hugely changes, but I think adds another. I think that there are not that many women in that show, and the ones that are there are fun, but I think really pigeoned into these like two
mhm.
roles of like the ingenue love interest and the like quirky older
Grandmother. Yep.
grandmother
Yeah.
role.
Hmm.
Oh, and the
And
conniving mother. You can't
yes,
forget
oh, and
Pastrada,
the
played by
conniving
Right.
mother.
Charlotte d'Amboise in the revival, who is incredible.
Yes, they're
Incredible.
very
Yeah.
Um,
stereotyped.
Stereotypes.
And to
Very
then
stereotyped, yeah.
have a black woman be pulling all the strings for the show as the leading player, I think just adds such an interesting other element, which brings us back to each time you see a production with different casting, different
Hmm.
staging, you're
Hmm.
gonna get and different generations are gonna think back to like which of those leading players was your leading player is
Yeah.
gonna
Right.
change how you think about that show and whose voice you hear when you see Pippin.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And, I know we're at time, but if I can just ask just one more question is how, like in your book, how do you both figure, we've talked page to stage. I keep like thinking of you, Paige, but page to stage. And, how about movie musical adaptations? Because now we're adding another layer. Stacy knows I love meta, just like Stacy. We're in synchronicity because I'm like a very meta, like adaptation kind of literary scholar, which is what do you do with Chicago, say, where my husband, you know, his reference was the film. My reference was the film, but also like I had seen on YouTube like versions of the original. So like when he saw the black box theater and he's like, wait, where's the set? And I'm like, no, this is the vaudeville stage. I was like, our imagination is the set. And he's like, oh. And that's where like their dance talent, but like that's where it really, in my opinion, matters who is dancing because
Yeah.
you can't hide. Like Fosse, you can't hide with Fosse's choreography. Um, that's why some stunt casting has worked and a lot has, you know, I love Pam Anderson. I saw her though as Roxy, and it was just it was her being there is what made it interesting. Um, but like did it add more layers to Roxy in my opinion? No, I didn't get like a necessarily a certain acting choice.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
but right, like what do we do with the movie musicals now, right? Like Wicked, Chicago, right? We could keep adding all these different, even Grease, like right, Grease. I know the Broadway show, it wasn't a flop, but the movie definitely helped launch Grease into how it's known now
Totally.
in the canon. So like have movie musicals, do you think have they helped enhance understanding around feminist models in theater, or do they just replicate the same ideas that you're talking about in your book?
Well, I think that for audiences, movies become another archive or another experience, another entertainment form that become kind of a part of your whole material of how you interpret whatever you're seeing. So if you've seen Wicked movies, which we've talked about, Andrew, and you go back and you see the Broadway version or you see it on tour somewhere, having seen the movie will shape your um, shape your response to it and your engagement with it. We don't talk about movies specifically in the book because we are primarily concerned with the stage and are
Mm.
advocates for the stage and care a lot about the different productions that can be staged. But I think we could have written or could write a version of the kinds of approaches that we talk about that include a movie, and that the parts of things that we talk about that are more flexible with each different production might be approached in a different way because a movie, even as every time you interpret it, it's different. A movie is a text that doesn't, it's not open in the same way that a theater is.
Yeah. Yeah. And okay, so my final question, I promise, is okay, we do a little zinger, which is our current moment of theater on Broadway and the West End, right? We can throw the West End because I would say there's some more innovative things going on in the West End. Um, funding, all whatever, however you want to like theorize that. But are we in more complex narratives when it concerns gender and sexuality, or have we regressed? Because like we're talking about Chicago, we're talking about Pippin, and I'm like, these are pretty dream girls. These are pretty progressive, or even just beg a lot of questions. Are we in a space now where, you know, they're pushing the envelope, or are we kind of like going back to like that dissonant uh pleasure where we want to like throw tomatoes at the stage?
What
Well,
would you say, Paige?
I would say it's complicated, which is my way of kind of sidestepping the question. But I think each Broadway season, okay, what I will first say is when it comes to who is making Broadway musicals, women still are not given the
Yeah.
platform that men are, period, across the board. You can look up these numbers, they're always horrific, that women are not producing, directing, writing
Mm, mm,
at the level that men are.
Hmm.
It's specifically, white men in the theater add, the intersectional element, and people of color also aren't given the platforms, but women in general are when we look at who is making Broadway, women are still very disempowered in that front. That isn't to say that there aren't women who are doing incredible things on Broadway, and they have been since Broadway began. And some of what we talk about in our book, we gestured toward at the beginning some of these other projects of histories of Broadway that have tried to highlight women's contributions, because the women who have contributed to the history of Broadway are often then forgotten or kind of intentionally erased. And women have been there and shaped the form. So I before answering the question, it has to say that we like it is a dire state of like who actually gets to tell stories on Broadway,
Right.
and the West End, like these big professional stages. Um, that being said, I think looking at the like content of the musicals and the musicals themselves, I think each season I come away with kind of a different take of kind of where we are.
Mm.
There are times when I feel I look and I can say there's nothing original on Broadway. Everything is an adaptation or like comes from an existing intellectual property, and I'm not excited about it. Or I'm like, why are we reviving that again? And instead of giving, room for other interesting stories to be told, or I see a new musical and I say, wow, that was what made it, you know. And at
Uh-huh.
the same time, I can look to other examples of times when I have said, oh, like, look, there are a lot of like
Mhm.
women creators and women's voices on Broadway right now. I think one thing the Waitress being created by this all woman creative team and foregrounding women in its story was a step forward for Broadway. Hadestown, we also talk
Mm.
about in that chapter, but that's still running. That's I think a very intersectional show and is very interested in race and class and gender, and was kind of created with those ideas in mind. Softs was just on and then off Broadway, but that was engaging with feminism head on, and the kind of struggles of feminist history and building a feminist movement. So I think it kind of there's no kind of one
Yeah.
answer for me because I think I can find wins and I can find setbacks both, as a theater goer, and so I think it's hard to say in the moment what
Yeah.
the moment feels like because it's hard to say right now what's happening because I think it'll take us like 10 years at least, and then to look back and say, okay, what was happening at that time and why? And we're still in this very kind of like strange moment in musical theater where we're still kind of early post Me Too, which I think really
Hmm.
changed the musical theater landscape, and post the Black Lives Matter movement, and post COVID, and post the second Trump administration. There's like a lot that is constantly shifting in
Mm.
the theater landscape, and the which risks are being taken and why, and theaters that were taking a lot of risks 2 years ago are not taking risks now, and I think it's a very changeable, and I feel like it is not really a solid ground. That's my winding and avoidant answer to your question,
Well,
Andrew.
yeah, and I
But I
don't
don't
no
know if
no, and
Stacey
I
has
didn't
a
want you to
different thought.
like get in hot water, right? I think it's like there is no one right answer or one specific answer, right? I
Right.
mean, even like the musicals that we've talked about that we can point to from the 70s, the 80s, you know, we could mention all the other musicals in that season that, a lot of us don't even know because of their narratives that seem stuck in time, that weren't innovative or experimental. And, like I'm about to see Titanic. I mean, that is like, right, Celine Dion. What Marla Mindell is doing in that, I heard, is really fabulous comedy. So, like, yeah, I think it seems like though comedy like I talked about Death Becomes Her with Stacy. I've seen it twice. I feel like what's going on with female comedy on Broadway is really strong right now. Um or even right we could bring up Buena Vista Social Club, or there have been musicals that are really, what is it? Real Women Have Curves, is that the one that just left Broadway?
Yeah, which I think was
No.
a sad thing to see go because I think it was trying to tell kind of an interesting and complex women's story, and I think that's the other thing is there's ones that we don't know about because they're kind of duds, but then there's ones that were real gems that no one knows about because they didn't sell or they, um I think yeah, I think there's kind of both sides of it.
Yeah. Do you want to weigh in on this, Stacey, or do you want to stay out of the line of fire?
No, I agree with Paige. I think the only thing I would add is just a reminder, which, excuse me, I think
No, bless you.
was implied in Paige's answer, that it takes like 10 years for a show to be developed. So
Yes.
what Paige was saying is after this, all those things that were happening 10 years ago, we'll start seeing them soon if there are producers who have signed on.
Yeah.
If
Well,
they can get it produced.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait. Stacy, Paige,
Us too.
we'll make this Dream Girls trip happen. I mean,
Yes.
we're in each other's orbit. I'm just love that, we're both of you are just so the nuance that you bring to this book, the way that you've helped change. You've taught me new ways of seeing musical theater. And, Stacy knows I'm like a diehard musical theater person, but I just love having conversations like this. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Yes. And everyone, get your hands on Feminist Approaches in Musical Theater. I know that they can go to Methuen Drama, METHUEN drama.com. Drama Bookshop, get it from your independent bookstore. And yeah, anything you want to plug, or we got it all covered.
Well, we're going to be at Drama Books on April 30th.
Oh, good. Okay. So
At the
April
Drama
30th.
Bookshop. Yep.
Okay. So everyone
Yep.
can see Stacy and Paige in person, live in person. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you both. Such a fabulous
Thank you.
conversation.
Take care.
Have a
Take
good
care.
holiday weekend too.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.